All right, this is take two of Knight's Tale Part 1. In a time of quarantine, I have been driven to my home to teach online, and this is how we're apparently going to go about this, at least for the time being. So, for my students that are tuning in, I figured this was the easiest way to get the information to you in a fashion where you can pause it, you can stop me, we can deal with questions over Zoom as opposed to in the middle of the lecture. And in this way, it's not going to take as long as it would in the classroom because we have a lot of catching up to do. So this is take two. I've already messed this up once, so bear with me. Um, First apology. The Middle English reading is going to be a little bit shaky. I haven't been reading in Middle English out loud in a while, so bear with me on this. I also need to give you guys a little bit of background before we get too far into this, and also I need to remind you a little bit about what we studied first semester. So, The Knight's Tale is technically a romance, but it's not a romance like the ones that we have studied before, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Le Morte d'Arthur. Sir Gawain itself being kind of unconventional, but not nearly as unconventional as The Knight's Tale. The Knight's Tale is actually a fragment of let's see if I can put this right. It's a fragment of the Tessida, which is Boccaccio's um, epic poem of Theseus. Okay, Theseus, the same Theseus who defeated the Minotaur, who escaped from the labyrinth, who dumped his girlfriend Ariadne on an island and married his or married her sister, and a lot of problems ensued from that. The same Theseus who eventually, as we're going to see in this poem, defeats Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, and brings her back as kind of a war trophy and as a wife, along with her sister Emily, who is the object of the deuteragonist's attention in this tale. Um, these characters are not going to be stylized like they're in ancient Greece. However, they're going to be stylized like they are in 14th century Italy or England. Um, Primarily Italy because Chaucer is drawing from the Tessida. The Tessida itself is drawing from the end of Statius's Phoebiad, which is the history of Thebes in mythology and deals with Oedipus Rex and his family. One of the important characters that we're going to see at the beginning here is Creon. Creon is kind of a ruthless Theban king who doesn't necessarily let people bury their dead. There have been a couple plays about Oedipus's family and the tragedy that his family goes through. And we've talked about this because we dealt with Freud and Hamlet, so we talked about the Oedipus complex. And I don't want to get too far off track here, but what the knight is doing, and really what Chaucer is doing, is taking a section of the Tessida and focusing on lesser known characters, Arcita and Palamon, and then this Emily who becomes kind of the object of their love and kind of the lady in the romance. And Chaucer is, of course, going to ignore the fact that in Greek mythology, Emily would have been an Amazon who would have cut off one of her breasts to better bend a bow. She's not going to be a warrior woman like she should be in mythology. And Theseus himself is stylized as a duke. We see this also in Shakespeare and Lydgate. If you've read Midsummer Night's Dream, that's a pretty famous example of Theseus as a duke. So Chaucer through the night is contemporizing for his time a lot of these mythological figures, and he's drawing from Boccaccio, Statius, and he's also drawing from Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, and we'll get more into that when we get into maybe the third video, um, when we're discussing Knight's Tale Part 3 or 4. Um, he's obviously pulling from Greek mythology considerably, so you're going to need to remember your Greco-Roman mythology. The names are going to be the Roman names, obviously, because we're dealing with Italian poetry that has been reworked into Middle English and and kind of transformed into the kind of story that Chaucer wants to tell. and he's also fusing it with again Latin poetry and Latin philosophy and lots of other fun things. The medieval romance sans anything Arthurian. Um, as we see if we read the entirety of the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer is not a really big fan of Arthurian legend. There are a few references to the Arthurian knights. Gawain and Lancelot and Percival come up as allusions. Um, some of them in Sir Topas, which is a joke romance that Chaucer the Pilgrim actually tells, and he is interrupted because the romance is so bad, according to the other pilgrims, and especially the host, Harry Bailey, who just kind of cuts him off, gets the hook, and says, hey man, your tale rhyming is, I believe the quote is actually, it's not worth a turd. Because it's the Canterbury Tales, right? This particular romance featured a three-headed giant and three layers of armor and an arming sequence. Chaucer went pretty nuts trying to bash the romance genre. However, Troilus and Cressida, which is similar to The Knight's Tale, which might be his magnum opus, is also considered a romance, but it's a little bit different than these romances that we've read. So um, let's get into this. Okay, so this proem at the beginning, okay, a poem that introduces something is called a proem if it's not an epigraph. And of course, it's in Latin. I'm not going to butcher it. Translates to, and now Theseus drawing nigh near his native land in laureled car. Laurels are the symbol of victory, obviously. After battling with the Scythian folk, etc. Scythia is another word for what the Middle English will call Femini. Femini is the Isle of Lesbos. This is the Isle of the Amazons. So this is right after he brings back Hippolyta and Emily. This is late in Theseus's military career, and at this point he's more of a statesman. He will be stylized as a medieval knight. He likes to go on hunts. He needs ladies' lamentations in order to act with clemency, as we're going to see not only in this scene here, but in a scene later that's particularly important. The medieval gender roles we've gotten used to in the Canterbury Tales and in Gawain and the Green Knight are going to be important here. Um, so again, we're medievalizing or we're contemporizing for Chaucer these ancient stories, and Boccaccio was ahead of Chaucer on this, but Chaucer is taking Boccaccio's ideas in some different directions. Okay, 859. I'm going to butcher this Middle English. Just bear with me, please. Whilom as old stories telling us, there was a duke that hit Theseus. Of Athens he was lord and governor, and in his time switch a conqueror, that greater was there none under the sun. For many a rich country had he won, that with his wisdom and his chivalry, he conquered all the reign of Feminia, that whilom was crept Scythia, he crept Scythia, and wedded the queen Hippolyta, and brought him home with him in his country, with mutual glory and great solemnity, and eke her young sister Emily. And thus with victory and with melody, let this noble duke to Athens ride, and all his host in arms him besiege, and certes, if near too long to hear, he would have told you fully the manner, how wonden was the reign of Feminia, by Theseus, be Theseus, and be his chivalry, and of the great battle for the nonce betwixt an Athens and Amazons, and how a sage it was Hippolyta, the fair hardy queen of Scythia, and of the feast that was at her wedding, and of the tempest at her homecoming. But all the thing he moot as now forbear, he have God wot a larger field to air, and wacken be the oxen in me plough. The remnant of the tale is long enow, he will not let an eke known of this rota, that every fellow telling his tale about, and let's see now who shall the supper win, and there he left, he will again begin. Thank you, Chaucer. Okay, so he throws down what I believe is called, and I wish I had time to check this, but I am really shooting from the hip because this has to be up soon. He throws down what I believe is called an occupatio. An occupatio, and you can Google check me on this, is when we refuse to describe something, and by refusing to describe it, we end up describing it anyway, and this allows us to kind of gloss over it quickly. This is the knight setting the scene and kind of giving us where the story would land in the Thebaid and also in the Tessida if we were reading those texts instead. Um, but he's basically saying he's got a large field to plow here, and his oxen are weak, metaphorically. He needs he needs to forego describing everything, so he gives you just enough to get into it. And as with a lot of medieval romances, and of course Greco-Roman mythology that's being reworked, we are expected as an audience to know who these figures are, and he's kind of using the well-known figures like Creon and Theseus and Hippolyta as signposts to point us at these lesser-known figures like Palamon, Arcita, and Emily. Um, he also brings up the supper on 891. This is the storytelling contest that we were introduced to in the general prologue. This is the whole point of the frame tale narrative. We've got all these pilgrims telling stories, trying to win a contest. The knight arguably would have won the contest anyway because of his rank. But he's kind of competing here with these others, right? Let's see who's going to win this supper. I'm not going to tell a tale that's too long-winded. It's only in 4 sections, and it's not nearly the most long-winded tale in the Canterbury Tales. However, I'm competitive. I'm gonna try to win this dinner. Um, if we remember, there's supposed to be 2 stories on the way there and 2 stories on the way back. Some of the pilgrims get the opportunity to tell one tale, and the Canterbury Tales, by some critics, is considered finished because the Parson's Tale and Chaucer's Retraction do kind of knit things up, but it does not follow the structure that the host, Harry Bailey, sets up at the Tabard Inn at the beginning. We do not get as many tales as we're supposed to get. So the Knight's Tale would be in the running for best tale, along with several others. I again think the Wife of Bath basically should win everything. She's by far the most interesting character, and she not only is the most interesting, I think, to people today, but she's also mentioned in the prologues of other tales, and um, her outlook on feminism kind of makes its way into other sections of the narrative. She, of course, tells a story about knights as well, but it's a gender bender Arthurian where the women end up running everything, um, which we're actually going to see in here as well. We're going to have women praying for clemency, just like we saw in the Wife of Bath's tale, and we're going to see clemency done not only to uh, the women who lost their husbands to Creon, but also to Palamon and Arcita when they get in trouble later. But we need this female lamentation to bring this in. So this ties the Knight's Tale to the Wife of Bath's tale in terms of the gender, not just in terms of the idea that they're both romances. And obviously, the wife's is pretty farcical. Okay, 893. This Duke, of whom he make mention, when he was come almost unto the town, in all his weal and in his most pride, he was war as he cast his eye aside, where that there kneeled in the here where a company of ladies twa and twa, each after other clad in clothes black, but switch a cry and switch a roar they mak, that in this world is creature living, that heard switch another woman thing, and of this cry they nolden never stenten, till they the reins of his bridle henten. Okay, so these women stop him in the road. Their husbands have all been piled up. We're going to see after they were slain by Creon, and they're being eaten by dogs. We see in just a second here a comparison between the goddess Fortune, who we should be familiar with at this point. Fortune is even more important in this tale, however, because it has these Boethian elements from the Consolation of Philosophy, which we'll get into in a later video. But Consolation of Philosophy is basically the text that sets up the idea for medieval thinking concerning Fortune's wheel. And Fortune's wheel has turned for these women. They were all of a high rank. They were well respected, and now they are crying in the dust at the temple of Clemency. Clemency is just like it is in English today, originally a goddess, but in English today, the word clemency is to forgive somebody outright for their crime. It's even a legal term. You can be um, convicted of murder, and clemency will forgive you. This is the same kind of thing that again we saw in the wife of Bath's tale. Okay, so Theseus wants to know who these women are. He's been gone for a while, and he has no idea why they need something from him. And again, Theseus basically makes his own decisions. A lot of critics have been pretty clear about this, but sometimes he needs a female to put him on a quest or put him to a task, and that task is clemency a couple of times in this narrative without spoiling too much. So pay attention to how Theseus ends up supposedly being swayed by women when really it's kind of performative. It's kind of an act. Okay, 905. What folk ben ye that at min homecoming, perturben so me faced with crying, quoth Theseus. Have ye so great envy of me no more that thus complaining and crying? Or who have you misbolden or offended? And tell it me if it may be amended, and why that ye been clothed thus in black? The eldest lady of them all spake, when she had swooned with a deadly cheer, that it was ruth for to see and hear. She said, Lord, to whom fortune hath given victory as a conqueror to live in, not grieveth us your glory and your honor, but we beseeken mercy and succor. Have mercy on our woe and our distress. Some drop of pity through thy gentleness. Upon that wretched woman let outfall, for certes, Lord, there is none of us all that she hath been a duchess or a queen. Now we be caitiffs, as is well as saying. A caitiff, this is still an English term. They've translated this correctly, is a miserable wretch. So, Fortune has dropped them off the top of that wheel. They were duchesses or queens. Now they are miserable wretches with nothing. And Fortune is next here. 925. Thank to be fortune, and here false a wheel, that none estate assured to be wheel. Okay, the estates here, we're talking about, in general, the three estates, those who pray, those who fight, and those who farm, basically, pretty much everybody else, those who work, right? But the way that Chaucer has worked the estates out in the general prologue, he's kind of stretched it into all these different professions, right? And when we get to Lydgate, who is inspired by Chaucer and also by the Danse Macabre, and his Fall of Princes, we see the estates stretched out even further, characterized similarly to what we see in the general prologue. So estate satire is it's a genre that Chaucer is familiar with, and he problematizes estate satire by creating these characters that represent their jobs or their roles, and kind of giving the audience, us, the opportunity to determine whether they're actually good at their job or not, and whether they're actually decent people or not, especially compared to earlier estate satire, which basically tells the audience straight out, hey, this person is bad, this person doesn't know how to do their job. Chaucer, as we saw through the general prologue, with the exception of the summoner and the pardoner, and the friar, I would also argue, and I would argue the monk, although some people disagree with me, these characters, I think Chaucer is a little more heavy-handed with, and basically lets us know, hey, these guys are bad, right? But think back to your prioress, or even the wife. We put the wife on trial. In some classes, the wife was acquitted. In some classes, she was not, and she needed to go on the stocks, right? It really depends on how you look at these characters. Chaucer gives us that freedom to judge for ourselves, and this is kind of a new thing when it comes to estate satire. Okay, so this is what is being referenced here when she says estates. No estate is safe from fortune. You could be the richest person, the most powerful person. You could be Alexander the Great. You could be King Arthur. You're going to get dropped off that wheel eventually. So this is common thinking in the Middle Ages, throughout the literature and throughout the dogma of the church as well. Okay, which is kind of interesting because here's a Roman goddess making her way into religious doctrines. Okay, so no one is safe from fortune, just like in the Pardoner's Tale, no one is safe from death. 927. On certes, Lord, to abide in your presence, here in this temple of the goddess Clemens, or uh, Presenza Clemenza, if we want to hit that terminal E a little harder there. We had been waiting all this for tonight. Now help us, Lord, sit it is in me micta. E richa, which that weapon while thus was whilom wife to King Capanius, that starve at Thebes, cursed be that die. Okay, starve, starved. To starve in Middle English, a lot of the time, actually just means to die. So they've translated this correctly, and that's something you might want to make sure you get into your notes because we're going to run into that again and again, and it's a little bit confusing if you don't have an interlinear translation like this. Um, so she was the queen, and her king died at Thebes, and we're going to kind of get into like what Creon is doing to these dead bodies. If we think back to the Iliad, which I have given you guys a little bit of um, as an assignment later this week, it's kind of a menu selection thing because we're all online now, right? You don't have to look at the Iliad. You could look back at Mallory if you'd like for a comparison, but I gave you the opportunity, and this is in Plan Book Day 2. But if we think back to the Iliad and we think of the death of Hector and Achilles refusing to basically let the body be interned properly to put the coins over the eyes or over the tongue, depending on the tradition, to say the prayers. The idea in Greek mythology is if you don't get a proper burial, um, you end up becoming like a wandering ghost. You can't cross the river Styx. So I think it's important, just like when we talked about Beowulf, to look at the original religion of the characters that are dealing with these situations, and to try to look at it from that outlook because it opens up our discussion a little bit. What Creon is doing by not allowing these bodies to be buried and going through the rites, he's basically not allowing them to join their families in Elysium if they have earned the right to go there. So it's pretty messed up, honestly, right? And Theseus and dealing with this situation would be considered heroic in the original context of this story. So again, we've got medieval poets who are taking ancient Greek legends and kind of doing their own thing with them. But just like with Beowulf, we have to look back at the original culture that these stories come from, and we have to kind of look at it from different viewpoints, I would argue. Different lenses, if we like the word lenses these days. Okay. Um, so starved at Thebes. Okay, 934. Und alle way that being in this array, that maken all this lamentation, we lost us all our husbands at that tone, while that the sage thereabout lay. And yet now the old decree on well away, that Lord is now of Thebes this city, fulfilled of ear and of iniquity, he for despite and for his tyranny, to do the dead bodies villainy, of all our lordes which that been Islam. When we see that why, um, this is I could look up the tense, but this is being recorded. But basically, the thing for you to do at this point is to delete the y, and you'll basically get close to the word. This is slain. We've got idra. This is drawn. So been slain. Um, what is this? Past present. If we get into a tense like this, and again, I'm botching the grammar here, but if we get into a tense like this in Middle English, we sometimes see this y come up. And the easiest thing for us in modern English is to contextually think about what the verb is doing and to remove those y's and not be too concerned about that. Okay, 943. Again, of all our lords which the bin Yisla hath all the bodies on the heap ye draw. Okay, he's dragged all the bodies into a heap. I don't know if I agree with that translation because to draw a body, as we know, can be to rip it to pieces. And we get the idea that he's desecrating corpses. So this actually might be a little bit nastier than what Harvard has here. 945. And will not suffer him by non assenta, neither to be buried nor ye brenta, but maketh hondas etem in despita. So they can't be buried, they can't be burned. We're not saying the prayers, we're not giving them any funeral rites. Dogs are eating them. This is a really big insult. And again, this would mess with the afterlife. kind of like Grendel killing people in their sleep, would mess with the afterlife if the heroes in Beowulf are still pagans, following in what we know of Norse mythology. Okay, 948. Hod with that word withouten more respite, they fillen grof and creeden piteously. Have honest wretched women some mercy, and lot our sorrows sinken in thine herte. This gentle Duke down from his courser sterte, with heart piteous when he heard them spake. Him thought that his herte would break, when he saw him so piteous and so mad, that whilom were of so great a state, and in his arms he him all uphent, and him comforted in full good intente, and swore his oath, as he was true a knicht, that would doen so ferfully his michte, upon the tyrant Creon him to wreake, that all the people of Greece should spake, how Creon was of Theseus served, as he that had his death full well deserved. And right anon, without and more aboot, his banner he displayed and forth rode to Thebes word, and all his host besiede. No near Athens would he go ne rede, ne take his ease fully half a day, but onward on his way that neat he lay, and sent upon anon Hippolyta the queen, and Emily her young sister Shena, unto the town of Athens to dwell, and forth he reaped, there is no more to tell. Okay, so Theseus is going to go deal with the problem. He's not even going to go home, but he's going to send the two women home ahead of him. This is his home. This is not their home. Again, they've been taken from their home. They are kind of prisoners of war. Um, we get the idea in Midsummer Night's Dream that Theseus eventually wins Hippolyta's love, um, but Chaucer is less clear how he thinks this relationship is actually going. But we basically we do have to win Emily through contests of arms and through your typical romance narrative, but she doesn't really get to make a choice either. So the agency of women is kind of an issue in the Knight's Tale, and that might make for an interesting way of looking at it, or an interesting topic for an essay. Um, Emily really doesn't want either of these guys to get interested in her later. She goes to Diana and she's like, "Hey, can I just be a nun?" And Diana's like, "No, you got two men fighting over you. One of them's going to get you." Very, very patriarchal, right? Okay. Theseus, of course, is also patriarchal. He's going to use his manliness to go defeat this other army, and he's going to do to the Thebans what they have done to everybody else. He's going to pile up their dead, and this is when we're going through their piled up dead. This is where we actually meet Palamon and Arcita, who are the major characters in this story. Chaucer is withholding them, and Boccaccio was probably more focused on Theseus. Honestly, the Tessida, that word goes back to Theseus, like the tale of Theseus, or the legend of Theseus might be easier for us. Um, but Chaucer is not 100% focused on the original protagonist. He's going to focus on these two younger guys. But again, he needs to introduce us to them through these figures that are more familiar. Speaking of a familiar figure, look at 975. The red statue of Mars with spear and targe. Okay, and a targe is a smaller shield, but that doesn't make much sense. So I can see why they've translated it as shield. And we're going to get into kind of the disparity between medieval weapons and ancient weapons. And obviously, this is of great interest to me. I won't bore everybody with it, but you can ask questions about this in the Zoom if you're interested. Chaucer and Boccaccio before him contemporizes this stuff, makes it more like the time that they're living in. And so the technology as well as the fashion is going to be medieval instead of ancient. Okay, 976. So shineth in his queet banner large, and all the fields glittering up and down, and by his banner borne is his pennon of gold full richte, in which there was a bit the Minotaur, which that he won in Crete. Thus reeked this duke, thus reeked this conqueror, and in his host of chivalry the floor, till that he come to Thebes and Elita, Far in the field, there is he thought to feed the. But shortly for to speaking of this thing with Creon, which that was Thebes king, he fought and slew him manly as a knight in plain battle and put the folk to fleet, and be assault he won the city after, and rent the down both wall and spar and rafter. And to the ladies he restored again the bones of her friends that were slain, to down obsequies as was though the case. But it were all too long for to devise the great clamour and the whammon thing that the ladies made at the brenning of the bodies, and the great honour that Theseus, the noble conqueror, doeth to the ladies when they from him went. But shortly for to tell is mean intenta. So if I've got this occupatio right, and I really want to check that on my phone at this point, but I'm recording, we see that same technique here again. He is excusing away not describing something by describing something. And this is a technique we'll see again and again, but it does give us the opportunity to pass over it quickly. You'll notice we got a pretty decent description of Theseus. He's compared to Mars with his statue. We're going to see this again. This is really important. This is more foreshadowing, just like the Lamentations of the Women and the Road is foreshadowing. We've got the field. How does he have this? So shines in his large white banner that all the fields glitter all around. A field on a shield or on a banner is the background, and I think that's what Chaucer is actually referring to here. He's describing Theseus's coat of arms, and his coat of arms, we have it embroidered with gold, the pennon, and then we have the symbol of the Minotaur, and then the banner is white, and the field on the banner, the way that I'm reading this, glitters. And maybe Harvard's right, but given how heraldry works, what we're doing here either way, we're definitely again contemporizing or medievalizing this ancient Greek hero by giving him a coat of arms like a medieval knight would have. We're again calling him a duke. He's the flower of chivalry on 982. We have seen this before applied to Gawain, applied to Lancelot, applied to King Arthur. Here we're applying it to an ancient Greek hero who predates the concept of chivalry. But romancers in this time period, of course, and earlier in the High Middle Ages, are actually trying to take chivalry all the way back to David in the Old Testament of the Bible. They're going to tell us that David was the original knight, and this is definitely played up in Le Quest del Saint Graal, the French version of the Grail Quest, and it's also written into the Saint Grail in La Morte d'Arthur as well, which is Mallory's redacted version of it. So the idea of making ancient figures that are not French or British or Italian into knights, it's actually something that's going on quite a bit in the literature of the time, and it's not so strange to the people that are reading back then as it probably looks to us today. Again, Theseus is stylized as this romance figure, this knight. Maybe even a chronicle figure because he's more of this conqueror. He's also still epic in the ancient Greek sense. So he's this fusion of these different hero genres, right? So we spend a lot of time building that up, and then what happened to the actual battle? He puts them to flight in plain battle. He wins the city in an assault, and he tears down the wall and the beam and the rafter, and he gives the ladies the bodies of their husbands back. This is in just a few lines. If we were reading Mallory, or if we were reading the alliterative Morte Arthur, this would make up an enormous chunk of the poem. The violence isn't important to Chaucer. And if we go and we look at J. Burrow argued this was a tenet of Ricardian poetry, and he coined this term, poetry written during the time of Richard II. One of the things that he sees in Gower, Langland, Chaucer, and the Gawain poet is that there's really not a lot of focus on battles. We have these characters who are men that are warriors, and they fulfill their masculine gender role, and they are stylized as chivalric figures. but we don't get to really see them do that much in terms of demonstrating their prowess in battle. We can drop something like the Flower of Chivalry and just move on. Um, and again, this kind of demonstrates that the poetry that we were reading earlier in the class, and some of it is actually later period than this, was kind of out of style during Chaucer's time. We're looking at continental romances, um, but even more, we're looking at ancient ideas that we are medievalizing or contemporizing, right? Instead of instead of looking back to the so-called chronicle past of England or France, we're looking outwards. Okay, 1001. I've got about 25 minutes before my next meeting to get through this. When that this worthy Duke this Theseus hath crayons slain in one Thebes thus, still in the field he took all nicked his rest, and did with all the country as him lester, to ransack in the task of bodies deader, him for to strip of harness and of weather, the pillows did in busyness and cura, after the battle and discomfiture, so that befell that in the task they founda, through girt with many a grievous bloody wonder, to young knicks leaking by and by, B and B actually, both in own arms wrought full richly, of which two Arcita heat that one, and that other knicked height Palamon. Okay, so we're finally introduced. This is 1013, 1014 to Arcita and Palamon. Okay, these are our deuterogamists, our dual protagonists of the tale. And interestingly, kind of like in the Iliad, we're going to have these two men fighting over a woman, kind of like in Le Morte d'Arthur, right? In the Tessida, Arcita sees Emily first, and they both fall in love with the same girl, but Arcita sees her first. In Chaucer's version, The Knight's Tale, Palamon sees Emily first. And of course, we have the romantic notion of love at first sight, right? But it's important that Chaucer makes this change. But interestingly, we notice on 1013, he's introducing Arcita first and Palamon second, whereas Palamon is the figure that we should be a little bit more concerned with here. So this might actually be an oversight on his part. Okay, 1015. Not fully quick, ne fully dead they were, so quick meaning alive. But be her coat armors and be her gear, the herald's canoe he best in special, as they that wearing of blood real, of Thebes and of Cestrin to ye born. Out of the task the pillars had him torn, and had him carried soft unto the tenter of Theseus, and he forsoon him sent to Athens, to dwellen in prison perpetually, he knowed no ransom. Okay. So these guys basically bear the brunt of Theseus's wrath against Creon. He throws them in prison. They're found in a heap of bodies. He throws them in prison perpetually, and he won't take any ransom. Of course, as we already should know, ransom is a medieval idea. You would ransom a knight who was defeated in battle. This even happened to Richard the Lionheart, right? More medievalizing or contemporizing of the ancient tale here. We also see that Theseus at the beginning of the tale is almost as bad as Creon. He has these heaps of bodies just like Creon, but at least we're looking through them and we find these two knights of royal blood again because we're medievalizing this, and they are cousins, and they're going to want to fight to the death over a girl, but right now they are two prisoners that are put in a jail together, and Theseus's original position is no ransom. They're not going to be let out of jail for any reason. These guys are going to be in prison for the rest of their lives. We talked about clemency towards the beginning here. Obviously, we're going to need some clemency for the narrative to move forward, and we're going to have kind of a forking path with these two because one ends up getting clemency and ransom, and the other one does not. And then we're going to need a second clemency to put them on the path where they can actually get to the girl. So there's a reason the knight says he has a large field that he needs to plow, and his oxen are weak, meaning he has little time to do it. Okay, 1025. And when this worthy duke had thus done, he took his host, and home he written on, with laurel crowned as a conqueror, and there he liveth in joy and in honour, term of his life, what needed word is more. And in a tower, in anguish and in woe, this Palamon and his fellow Arcite, for evermore there may no gold him quit. So again, no ransom. We've covered this already, but it's interesting that he said it twice. This passeth year by year and die by die, till it fill once on a more of May, that Emily that fairer was to see than is the lily upon the stalk of grain, and fresher than the May with flowers newer, for with the rose colour strove here hua, a note which was the finer of him too, ere it were die, as was her wont to do, she was a reason in already date, for May will have no sloggardy, I'm right, the season pricketh every gentle heart, and maketh it out of his sleep to start, and saith, Aris, and do thine observance. This market Emily hath remembrance, to do an honour to Maya, and for to Reese, yet clothed was she fresh for to the feast. Her yellow hair was broidered in a tress, behind her back a yard long, I guess. And in the garden at the son of priest, she walketh up and down, and as her leaster, she gathered flowers, partly wheat and red, to make a subtle garland for her head, and as an angel heavenishly she sung. The great tower that was so thick and strong, which over the castle was the chief donjon, thereas the knights were in prison, of which he told you in telling shall, was even joyant to the garden wall, there as this Emily had her playing. Bright was the sun and clear that morning, and Palamon, this woeful prisoner, as was his wont, by leave of his jailor, was risen and roamed in a chamber in high, in which he all the noble city sigh, and eke the garden full of branches green, there as this fresh Emily the sheen was in her walk and roamed up and down, this sorrowful prisoner, this Palamon, goeth in the chamber roaming to and fro, and to himself complaining of his woe, that he was born full of he said, alas, and so befell by aventure or cast, that through a window thick of many a bar, of eon great and square as any spar, he cast his ear upon Emilia. And therewithal he blent and cried, Ah! As though he strong it were unto the helter. And with that cry Arcita anon upstarta, and said, Cousin mean, what aileth thee? That art so pale and deadly unto see. Why criedest thou? Who hath thee done offence? For God's sake, take all in patience. All a peasant, for it may none other be. Fortune hath given us this adversity. Some wicked aspect or dispassion of Saturn by some constellation hath given us this, although we had it sworn, so stowed the heaven one that we were born. We must endure it all, this is the short and plain. So, a lot's actually going on here, right? The first thing I'm going to point out, because it's the last thing that I saw, we've got the idea of Saturn, who is the melancholy god in medieval astronomy, and the melancholy star. We're going to get way more into this in the third part of the Knight's Tale when we look at the statues of these gods, and these gods actually begin to intervene in mortal lives. But Saturn gets blamed in medieval astrology or astronomy for a lot of fortune's mishaps. Okay, we've also got the reference to the goddess Fortune. We were knights, we were cousins. We were in the army that won the battle, and then Fortune's wheel turned, and now we're in prison. Okay, this is very Boethian. Of course, Boethius in the Consolation of Philosophy is in prison, waiting to be executed, and the goddess Philosophy comes in and basically breaks him of his understanding that Fortune has caused his great fall. He never should have trusted Fortune to begin with, right? So, again, all of this thought is early to late medieval. Boethius is on the very cusp of antiquity, um, and it's medieval thinking that is mostly influenced by him. He's writing in the 6th century, but ultimately we have this love at first sight situation, and he's actually crying out as if he's been harmed, right? We might think of being struck by Cupid's dart. This is a pretty big deal in medieval writing as well as in ancient writing. We also have the idea of if we go back to the Romance of the Rose, which Chaucer also translated, we have the cult of the lover or the cult of Cupid, and there's even rules that you're supposed to follow. It's kind of like Fight Club, but it's Cupid Club, basically. There are rules that you follow if you're a courtier. Um, and there are ways that you're supposed to woo a lady, and Chaucer's audience would be familiar with those rules. Um, and this is a high style romance, so we're going to want these two gentlemen to obey those kinds of rules in wooing this lady. They can't really do this from prison, is part of the problem. We've also got the idea of if we look at the five senses and the way that medieval people would think of them, um, the extramission theory of vision, we have the idea that we basically send out beams of light through our eyes in order to see things, but also as we're doing this, that our senses are vulnerable to what we see, and we might even need to guard the senses against what we experience. Um, Palamon hasn't done this, kind of like Melody and Chaucer's Legend of Melody, where he lets wounds in through the five senses, which are displaced onto his daughter, and that's another story to talk about later. Um, he lets in the sight of Emily, and it wounds him. Okay, so Chaucer spends much more time on this, and also prefiguring the constellation of Saturn and the idea of fate. The workings of medieval cosmology are kind of fixating on this moment where he sees this girl in the Tessida again in Boccaccio's work that Chaucer is drawing from. It's not Palamon that sees her first; it's Arcita. That's going to be important later. So Arcita doesn't see the girl, and he's coming at him with the consolation of philosophy. Basically, he's coming at him with the kind of book learning that he would have gotten as a knight in the 14th century if he had been paying attention in school. Of course, I'm trying to remember where we get our astrology from. It'll come to me. The Almagest, Ptolemy's Almagest, is a huge text that was brought up in the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale as well. So Arcita completely misses the point. He's coming at him with philosophy and science, and Palamon has been struck by love. This very much recalls the Romance of the Rose, which Chaucer translated, and Boccaccio certainly would have been aware of as well. Um, it's a 13th century work. Wow. Okay, there's your coronavirus. Every single business that has ever gotten my email is emailing me about the coronavirus. I don't know about you guys. All right, moving on. 1092. This Parliament answered and said again, Cousin, forsooth of this opinion thou hast a vain imagination. This prison caused me not for to clear, but he was hurt right now throughout mid eye, his eye, into mine heart that will my banner be. Okay, and if we remember, Gower, who was Chaucer's friend and contemporary, writes about this as well. I think it's in Mire de Leon that he writes about this. Don't make eye contact with girls. Bad things can happen. 1098. The fondness of the lady that is say, yond in the garden roaming to and fro, is cause of all my crying and my woe. I not where she be woman or goddess, but Venus it is soothly as a gosse. And therewithal on knees down he fell, and said, Venus, if it be thee will, you in this garden thus to transfigure, before me sorrowful wretched creature, out of this prison help that we may escapen. And if so be me destiny be shapen, be etern word to die and in prison, of our leaving have some compassion, that is so low it brought be tyranny. And with that word our seat began a spy, whereas this lady roaming to and fro, and with that seat her beauty hurt him so, that if that Palamon was wounded sore, Arcita his hurt as much as he or more. And with a sigh he said piteously, the fresh beauty slayeth me suddenly. I've heard that Roman in the yonder plaza, but ye have her mercy and her grace, that ye may see her at the least way, in none but dead, there needs no more to say. This Parlament, when he the words held, dispiteously he looked and answered, Whether say'st thou this in earnest or in play? Nay, quoth Arcita, in earnest be me fay. God help me so, may listful evil play. This Parlament gan knit his brows tway. It ne'er, quoth he, to thee no great honour, for to be false, nay, for to be traitor to me, that am thee cousin and thee brother, is sworn for death, and each of us till other, that never for to dien in the pain, till that the death depart shall us twain, neither of us in love to hinder other, nay, on none other cast me leave a brother, that thou shouldest truly fortune may, and ever cast as each shall fortune they. This was thine oath, in mean also certain, it would right well thou darst it not withsay. Thus art thou of me counsel out of daughter, and now thou wouldst falsely been a botter, to love me laddie, whom I love and serve, and ever shall till that me heart and sterve. Ne certes false artsite, thou shalt not so. I loved her first, and told thee me woe. As to me counsel and me brother sworn, to further me, as ye have told before, for which thou art bonden as a knecht, to helpen me, if it lay in thee meet, or else art thou false, I dar well sayin. So, oldest story in the book, right? I saw her first. You're supposed to be my bro. You're my cousin. You're supposed to help me. You're not supposed to fall in love with the same girl as me. You're bound by honor. And we saw this blood brother oath in the pardoner's tale as well, and we saw how well that worked out. You're bound by your honor as my blood brother, as my sworn brother, to protect me and to do right by me, not to metaphorically stab me in the back here and try to get with the same girl. Um, but all's fair in love and war. Okay, and the two chief gods that we see here, other than Saturn and Diana, who will show up, are Venus and Mars. Okay, who have already been prefigured at this point, right? Love and war. Okay, interestingly, if we think back to our Greco-Roman mythology, they're also lovers, right? Um, okay, 1152. These Arsata for Pradis back again. False what, quoth he, be rather false than he. On thou art false, he tell thee outwardly, for Paramori loved her first though. What will in saying, thou wast not yet know whether she be woman or goddess, Venus faction of holiness, and mean is love as to a creature, for which he told thee mean aventure, as to me cousin and me brother sworn. He posed that they lovest her before, wast thou not well the oldest clerk saw, that who shall leave a lover any law? Love is greater law, be me pan, than may be give to any earthly man, and therefore passeth law and switch decrees, broken all day for love and age degree. A man mote need his love, maga his heed. He may not flay in it, though he should be dead. Albeit she might, or widow, or else wife. And eke it is not likely all thy lief to stand in her grass, no more shall he, for well thou wouldst thyself in verily, that thou and he be damned to prison, and perpetually as gaineth no ransom, we strive as did the hounds for the boon, they fought all day, and yet hill part was known. There came a keat, when that they were so wroth, and bar away the boon betwixt them both. And therefore at the king's court, me brother, each man for himself, there is none other. Love, if they list, for I love, and I shall, for soothly live, brother, this is all. Here in this prison mote we endure, and ever each of us take his aventure. So again, all's fair in love and war. The oath really doesn't matter. And Arcita is actually acting like a member of the cult of Cupid. One thing that I missed in the description of Emily, I'm thinking about this now. Another theme that we see in medieval literature is during Maying, we have this May festival where we have nobles declaring for either the flower or the leaf, the true lover or the untrue lover, and I actually have that reversed. The flower is the untrue lover, and the leaf is the true lover. Um, and it's all this highly ritualized festival of flirtation. Um, there's a lot going on with outfits and with styles and whatnot. And Chaucer uses this at the beginning of the Legend of Good Women to show another self-inserted version of himself. That's a little redundant. To be kind of a loving fool when he's dealing with Cupid and Alcest, who show up at the beginning of that text. So he might be calling back to Legend of Good Women, but certainly to the festivals of the period when Emily comes out in the May, and strikes them in this way. And now I'm rhyming. Awesome. Okay, 1187. Great was the strife that long betwixt him twain, if that he had a leisure for to say, but to the effect it happened on a day, to tell it you as shortly as he may, a worthy duck that hight Perotheus, that fellow was unto Docthesius, sin thilke die that they will children lead, was come to Athens his fellow to visit, and for to ply as he was wont to do, for in this world he loved no man so, as he loved him as tenderly again. So well they loved his old book saying, that when that one was dead, soothly to tell, his fellow went and sought him down in hell. But of that story list me not to read. Though Perothes loved well Arcita, and had him canoe at Thebes year by year, and feelly at request and at prayer of Perotheus, without any ransom, Theseus let him out of prison, freely to go on where the him list over all, and switch a geese as you tellin shall. Okay, so Arcita gets out on clemency. Okay, there's actually no ransom. Perotheus helps him get out. Palamon is stuck in prison. Arcita is banished. He can't go anywhere near this place, Athens. Palamon is stuck there, but as a prisoner, and so this is where their paths kind of fork. So they fall in love with the same girl. One guy gets out of prison, but he can't ever see her because he's not allowed to be there. The other one sees her all the time, but he's stuck in prison. Okay, and Chaucer will ask us who suffers more. Again, allowing the audience to take part in the tale, to actually think, right? Okay, 1209. This was the forward plainly fortune died, betwixt Theseus and him Arcita, that if so were that Arcita were ye fonda, ever in his lief be day or night, so stonda, in any country of this Theseus, and here were caught, it was accorded this, that with a sweat he should lace his heed. There was no other remedy ne rede, but taking his lever and homeward he him spade. Let him beware his neck leath to wade. Okay, so again, he's banished, he's falstaffed. If he comes anywhere near here, he's going to lose his head. It's a good thing to get out of prison, right? Well, not for Arcita because he is in love, he thinks. And his argument against Palamon is that he loves this woman like a woman, like a creature of flesh and blood, whereas Palamon thought it was a goddess at first, and his love is more reverent, more otherworldly, and therefore not as hot, right, as they would say. So he doesn't, from Arcita's perspective, have a greater claim, even though he saw her first, because the way that Arcita is looking at it, he's kind of loving her in the wrong way. So again, we got these forking paths. 1219. How great a sorrow suffered thou, Arcita. The death he feeleth through his heart smitha. He weepeth where that crieth piteously, to slain himself he waiteth privily. He said, alas, the day that he was born. Now is me prison worse than before. Now is me shape eternally to dwell, not in purgatory, but in hell. Alas that ever knew ye Perotheus, for else had he dwelled with Theseus, he fettered in his prison evermore, then had he been in bliss and not in war, only the seat of her whom that he served, though that he never her grace might deserve, would han sufficed read enough for me. O dear cousin Palamon, quoth he, thine is the victory of this aventure, for blissfully in prison mayst thou dure, in prison certes nay, but in paradise. Well hath fortune yet turned thee the dice, that hast the seat of hell in the absence, for possible is, sin thou hast here presence, and art a knight, a worthy and an able, that be some cast, sin fortune is changeable, thou mayest to thy desire sometime attain, but I that am exiled in barren, of all a grace, and in so great despair, that there nis earth water fear nor air, ne creature of him that market is, that may me help or do comfort in this, will all this stelve and one hope in distress, farewell me lief, me lust, and me gladness. I'd like to point out at this point, he has never had a conversation with her. I don't even know for sure, unless we see that in this dialogue here, that he even knows her name at this point. I'm just going right back. And I'm trying to kind of data this. Yeah, I don't see any evidence here, and you can correct me if you've got more time. I don't see any evidence here that he even knows her name. So he's ready to kill himself because the nameless girl is not in his sight anymore, right? This seems pretty extreme to modern readers, but this is the genre, kids. Okay, 1251. Alas, we play in foxo in commune, of pervents of God or of fortune, commune fortuna. The David him for laugh and many a geese would better than they can himself devise. Some man desireth for to have riches, a richesse, that causes of his murder a great sickness, and some man would out of his prison fain, that is his house is of his main slain, that in his house is of his main slain. There we go. Even it harms been in this matter, we witten not that thing we pray in here. We foreign as he that drunk is as a mouse. A drunk man wot well he hath a house, but he not which the right way is thither. And to a drunk man the way is slither. And certes, in this world so fair and way, we sick and fast after felicity, but we go on wrong full often truly. Thus may we say in all, and namely that wind and hard a great opinion, that if ye made escapen from prison, then had ye been in joy and perfect healer. There now ye am exiled from my wheeler. Seeing that I may not see you, Emilia, I stand corrected. I nam but deed, there needs no remedy. So we don't actually have a scene where they speak, but somehow he does know her name. There's your evidence, 1273. Um, but it's not fleshed out, right? All right, I stand corrected. 1275. Upon that other seed the Palamon, when that he wist our city was agone, switch sorrow he marketh that the great Thor resoundeth of his yowling and clamour, the pure fetters on his sheaven great, wherein of his bitter salt tears waiter. Alas, quoth he, our city cousin mean, of our strife. Of all our strife, God would the fruit is thine. Thou walkest now in Thebes at the large, and of thy woo thou givest little charge. Thou mayst, since thou hast wisdom in mine head, assemble all of the folk of our kindred, and mark a well so sharp on this city, that be some aventure, some treaty, thou mayest have her to lady and wife, for whom he must needs lease me lief. For as be way of possibility, sit thou art at the large of prison free, and art a lord, great is thine advantage, more than is mine that steadeth here in the cage. For he mote weep and well will he leave, with all the woe that prison may me give, and eke with pain that woe me giveth also, this doubleth all my torment and me woe. Therewith the fear of jealousy upstarta within his breast, and hent him by the heart, so woodly that he leak was to behold the box tree or the ashen dead and cold. Symbols of death. Then said he, O cruel goddess that govern this world with binding of your word etern, and written on the table of adamant. We should be familiar with adamantium at the very least, right? Hardest of stones, hardest of metals, adamantium. Um, anyway, 1306. Your parliament and your return the granta, what is mankind more unto your holder than is the ship that broken in the folder? For Stein is man reet as another best, and dwelleth eke in prison and the rest, and hath sickness in great adversity, and oft times guiltless, pardie. What governance is in this prescience that guilt is tormenteth innocence, and yet increaseth this army penance that man is bounden to his observance? For God's sake to laten of his will, there as a beast may all his lust fulfill. And when a beast is dead, he hath no pain, but man after his death must weep and plain, though in this world he have care and woe. Without doubt it may stand and so. The answer of this late, Edu devise, divinis, divines, theologians, but really would that in this world great pain is. Alas, is said a serpent or a thief, that many a true man have done mischief, gone at his lodge and where him list may turn, but he moth been imprisoned through Saturn, and eke through Juno jealous and eke wood, that hath destroyed well me all the blood of Thebes with his vast wells wide, and Venus slayeth me on the other side for jealousy and fear of him Arcita. So we've got Juno and Saturn who team up to kind of wreck your life. melancholy gods. And then we've got Venus, who is destroying him on the other side with Arcita, his own cousin, who he thinks can just make war against Athens and probably carry the girl off. So both of these men think that the other one has it better. It's a grass is greener on the other side sort of situation. All right, we're coming to the conclusion here. 1334. The ruler stint of Palalon Olita, and laid him in his prison still a dweller, and of Arcita forth e will you tell her. That summer passeth, and the night is long, increaseth double which the pain is strong, both of the lover and the prisoner. In note which hath the woeful master, for shortly for to say, this Palamon perpetually is damped in prison, in chains and in fetters to be deed. And Arcita is exiled upon his head for evermore as out of that country, but never more ne shall this lady say. You lovers ask ye now this question, who hath the worse, Arcita or Palamon, that one may see his lady day by day, die by die. Actually, die be die, if I get this right. That one my saying his lady die be die, but in prison he mote dwell alway, that although where him list may read or go, but seeing his lady shall he never more. Now deem it as you list, ye that can, for he will tell forth is he begun. And we see explicit prima pars. The first part ends. There are 4 of these. And I am losing my voice a little bit here. So this first part sets up the conflict, obviously, right? We've got, to summarize very quickly here, we've got Arcita on the loose. We've got Palamon still in prison, and neither one of them has the kind of access that they want to this woman that they have fallen in love with just by looking at her. We have to go back to that extra missive theory of vision and the idea that you can be struck down by Cupid's dart of love to try to explain why these men are enamored with this girl so much. Or maybe we can look at the idea that they're in prison and this is the only thing that they're getting to see that's any good, right? So where does this go? There are 4 parts to this. In the next episode of Canterbury Tales, Dragon Ball Z, we basically we see Arcita come back and basically serve as a steward and pretend to be somebody that he's not, lower himself and lose his reputation as a knight in order to serve Emily and be close to her. And it only takes him a couple of years as a steward to come back into prominence, which is a little crazy for Chaucer. He might have raised an eyebrow writing this and might have cursed Boccaccio's name because it took him a lot longer than that in the same kind of capacity in the courts of several kings himself. Palamon, on the other hand, is going to have to escape from prison, and these two, of course, run into each other, and their feud continues. So, tale as old as time. There are 2 boys, and they both see a girl, and we've got a love triangle, and it's the Iliad, it's the Ramayana, it's La Morte Arthur. It's the love triangle. It is probably the world's oldest story. So it's interesting that we have these ancient figures who have been contemporized for Chaucer's time, and we're reading it here in 2020 in quarantine during the coronavirus outbreak. And maybe we can, if not agree with the way that these gentlemen fall in love with this lady, maybe we can agree with the sentiment behind the story, because I think all of us at some point have had that friend like Arcita who doesn't have our back when we fall in love. So take sides, argue about it. I'll probably put a discussion up about this pretty soon so we can hashtag Team Arcita, hashtag Team Palamon. Try to think about this in terms of your own life, because the stories don't really change. The armor and the weapons change. The technology changes. The fashions change. The language even changes, right? As we've definitely heard, as I've stumbled through Middle English for about an hour here. But the major problems of human existence don't really change. So those of you that are waiting for this quarantine to be lifted, hang in there. Stay tuned for more Knight's Tale. We'll try to make some kind of a production out of this.